I am glad. That's terrific. You doing okay today? Okay.
Bridget, Anya, and Barbara, they want everyone to try to sit toward the center. Can you all move over?
Those things in there.
We would appreciate it.
Okay. Kenny gets to take it over. Just for you. Whenever you are.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. Welcome to the 2014 School Budget Town Hall meeting. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our superintendent, but first, just a few rules of engagement for tonight. We are going to be hearing from the superintendent, and then we'll follow with a number of emails that we've already received from the community. And we'd also like to hear from those of you who are here in the audience. And when you have a question, all you'll have to do is raise your hand, and then we'll bring a microphone to you so that those who are watching on television or online can hear your questions as well. I'm Joe Galvan, and again, I appreciate you being here. At this time, I'd like to introduce our Superintendent of Schools, Stan Rounds.
And good evening. Good to see you all here. So this evening, our purpose is to go through our 2014-15 budget. I want you to know that it's about 95% complete. I want to recognize Terry Dean and his folks, especially for the work they've done. You know, they say when you have more money, it's easier to build a budget. That's not really true. As you have more money, it gets more difficult. One of our challenges this year is that we have a series of expectations from the state that have been laid into our, viewfinder is the term I would use. And so we've looked at those. I'm pleased to announce to you that unlike in prior years, we have more money for the 2014-15 year than we have in the current year in general. So the budget is in development. Many of the salary schedules are pending negotiations and ratification. In fact, a few of you in the room were with the LCPS team this afternoon looking at our negotiations on that, and I want to thank you for your diligence on that. The salary assumptions are based upon the legislative requirements, which are this. The legislature indicated that all educational employees should see a 3% salary increase on the average out of this budget cycle. And then to add to that, they indicated that educational assistants, that's special classification, would receive an additional 3% increase on the average. And so those are the basis of our negotiations. What we're looking at are a number of salary schedules. In this district, when I came about 7 years ago, our salary schedules had some problems in their alignment because our Tier 3 funding from the state over time really hasn't been quite what it needed to be. And so we've been trying to unravel that. And in these negotiations, I believe we'll continue to work at those particular aspects. Finally, the presentation is mainly based upon the general and capital outlay funds. One of the stymies in this particular budget is our federal projects authorizations coming from Santa Fe. They're a little slow coming in, and because of that, it creates, it's going to create compression, I guess is the term I use right at the end, as we try to get these into the budget stream. I would note that that's not a critical failure. We've had that happen before. We understand how to work our federal projects budgets, use our carryovers and things like that to be sure that we're able to continue paying folks for what they do. The only outstanding issue right at this moment that I'm aware of, Terry, is in our Head Start funding. And I don't believe we received notification of that because it had a reapplication cycle to it. And we believe we're well competitive in that. We expect to have positive affirmation on that. But at this point in time, we cannot contemplate that as a surefire fact. Now, we have several budget priorities that we're working within. The first of all, I want to point at the Board of Education, and I know I have 3 members of my board here this evening with us. And as we look these over, these are very important priorities the board has had, and as they directed us this year, we wanted to move ahead. And so we have smaller class size. Now remember with me back several years when there was a reduction in our budget. We swelled class size by using a waiver with the state of New Mexico to, in effect, add 3 additional students to the average class size calculations. So let me use an example to describe what that really means. So if you look at kindergarten classes, under New Mexico law, kindergarten classes have a 14 student to one teacher ratio that is in statute. Now, what it also says in statute that is upon the 15th child, you're to add an educational assistant until the 21st child. And at the 21st child, they ask you to add a teacher, or in other words, construct another class. Now, our waiver, in effect, did this. The 14th child requirement now became 17, and the 21st child requirement became 24. Now, the board is real interested and very concerned about our class sizes, especially in our younger students, because we know that that's the threshold that kids start learning at. And so what the board asks us to do is to continue to push down or to reduce those class sizes. Now, this legislature that just completed business in 2014 indicated that we would have a 3-year period for us to come back to the class size requirements. Now, it's our intention in this budget, and you'll see in a minute that we're adding staff, to begin at the lowest grade levels and work our way back into class size conformity with statute. Now, I want to just alert everybody that that's assuming that the legislature continues each of the next 3 years to increase funding to do that. And we certainly are supportive of that. We think small classes are a good practice, but there's also the logistics of hiring the teachers versus paying the teachers that we have to contemplate. Salary enhancement, the board believes that we should pay people a good wage across all classifications, and we continue to try to do that through our negotiated agreement and with our non-union members through our practice. And again, as I said earlier, that practice this year will be at the 3% and 6% average threshold is what's within the budget in general. Another issue the board is very interested in is that we have adequate supplies at the schools. In fact, simply put, we might say this. We want every teaching classroom to have what they need when they need it. Now, they didn't say have what they wanted when they wanted it. It said have what they need when they need it. And that's been a continuing effort on our part over the last 7 years to define what should be in the classroom. And you'll see in a moment that we're very pleased that we have some significant increases in our supplies and material support in the schools, in the classrooms. And I'm pleased that that's going to be part of this budget. The final issue is the access to technology. Now, in today's instructional environment, the days of technology are just beginning, I believe. And so you'll see as we go through this budget, both in the current year and next year, there's a lot of effort made in the area of technology. As an example, electronic textbooks cost about 85 cents on the dollar for a printed text. Of course, the only problem with electronic textbooks is that they have to have a platform to come off of, and so you have to have the technology in place before you can put the electronic textbooks in place to do that. And to really get there succinctly, you need about 2 devices for every 1 student. And out of this budget cycle, we should be in the vicinity of 4 devices. I'm sorry, 1 device for 4 students instead of 1 device for 2 students. If I said that backwards, I apologize. So access to technology is important. Now, it isn't just here at the school. We also recognize students needing to be able to go home and have advantage at home with their technology too. So portable technology is another important facet that we have. Now, the legislature weighed in on their requirements also. I mentioned several of those. There's the 3% average salary increase and the 3% additional average increase for educational assistants that I just mentioned. Now, there's also an increase in the Education Retirement Board rate for the employer, that's us, from the employees. 13.15% is going up to 13.9%, or a 5.7% increase, and a 2.85% increase to health insurance coverage. I'm pleased that the health insurance cost isn't as high as we'd anticipated. As we worked with the Education Retirement Board, with our New Mexico Public School Insurance Authority, we were able to, with their help, find a lesser increase than we thought there might be. In fact, we thought there might be as high as a 13 to 15% increase. Now, those of our employees in the last several years have noted we've been able to stay up basically with the increase in medical insurance costs to the employee. And this year, we're going to be able to do better than that. So that means take-home pay should be accelerated above what the cost is for those benefits. And that's good news, which means take-home pay will go up in the future year. Now, we also want to talk about other instructional enhancements that we're trying to make happen inside of the budget. 85,516. So a goal of this district is to have 85% of our students proficient or advanced in reading and mathematics and any subject area we measure by May of 2016 as measured by the Park assessment that's coming on next year. Now, some think that's a mouthful. We believe it's doable. We believe that 85% of our students can attain that level of educational quality in the classroom. We believe and know that we have quality instructional staff. We believe and know that we have quality instructional leadership, and all of us who support that are tuned in on this particular regard. We also have some other things that are helping us attain 85,516. In this next budget cycle, our turnaround initiatives are enhanced or increased. In fact, we're increasing 3 schools into the turnaround initiative of the district. Some people call that the University of Virginia Turnaround Program. I would like to move away from that nomenclature specifically and instead talk about our turnaround initiative or our initiative to improve education in the district. It's one of the tools of many that we're going to use to ensure students reach the 85,516 threshold I'm talking about. We also expect to expand the LEAP program. This is the Leading Edge Acceleration Program. This is a middle school alternative program that's at the old MEVTech site. That is our attempt to begin to test how we can deliver middle school education to students who don't normally do well in a general education or a general middle school format. See, our kids are different. As they matriculate through time or as they develop, they have specific needs. And in the LEAP program, we're seeing some very nice inertia with kids that were not making it in our system that are now. This year, we're serving 62 students in that program, and we expect to move that to almost 2 times that size, to at least 100 students in the next year, and that is within this budget. We have a startup of the Arrowhead Park Medical Academy, new term. We have had Arrow Park Early College High School, and that is for 500 students, grades 9, 10, 11, and 12 from around town at Arrowhead Park. The good news is, just last week, we graduated from Doniana Community College, 88 of those with at least one associate's degree. And I think that's good news for all of us. What's really good news in this is that in that student body, 63% of those students are first-time college goers in their family. And I'm particularly proud of that. And so we want to expand that now into Arrowhead Park Medical Academy, which is a second site that's adjacent to Arrowhead Park Early College. But its focus, as it says in its name, is strictly at the medical pathways that would be discovered in their education. We'll start with our first cohort. Now, that school will serve 250 students at full bore. That's half the size of Arrowhead Park Early College High School. We're cooperating with New Mexico State University, Doniana Community College, El Paso Community College, University of Texas at El Paso, Central New Mexico University, and even UNM Medical School to put together the tapestry of study for students that we know will be successful in this. And we're launching that this year. And because of that, we'll be staffing up. So in this budget, we'll be staffing for that effort that'll be occurring. And then we have an expansion of our Valley View mission. Now, as we all know, Valley View Elementary School has been a high-impact school since I've been here, I think for years in this district. In that particular construct, we continue to struggle a little bit to move student attainment or student education forward at the rate we want to. And so I brought Dr. Arsenio Romero, who is the current principal of the JUMP program, and asked him to take Valley View Elementary on and bring the JUMP strategy into Valley View Elementary, but not on a K2 basis, but on a K5 basis. Now, that missioning has only a very small cost impact, but we believe will have a very high impact on educational quality. So I would be remiss not to mention it in this presentation. So let's look at where we are, and this is an interesting chart to me. I don't know about all you non-statisticians, but this is normalizing two things, the unit value and the state equalization guarantee. Now, why would that matter? This is 98% of all of the all of the money we run on for operating expenses. That's why it's important. A unit value is a calculation made by the Public Education Department that takes the amount of money the legislature gives public education and divides it essentially by the units produced by the students in programs in the public schools. You see, as an example, a kindergarten student, a high school student, let me use that. A high school student is worth 1.25 units, or in other words, is 25% more costly than a base cost might be at 1.0. And now under the public school equalization formula, there are a series of cost indexes or indices that produce that effect. So unit value is the total appropriation divided by the total units. Now that's important to those of us that are budget watchers, because it begins to show the altitude of the commitment the legislature is making in relationship to things like increased number of students or increased number of programs. And so it really lets us see, is it keeping up or not? If you look at this chart and you look early on, which is right in here, you'll see that we're normalizing our units right here in the 2012-13 year. If you go backwards, you'll notice that if you look at the blue and green lines, they're right on top of each other at the beginning, aren't they? You notice, do you see up here until 2008 and 9, they stayed together. And then something happened. The bottom fell out of the state budget. And so you start to see is a division between the slope for unit value and the slope for state equalization guarantee. And notice from 2008-9 all the way to 2010 or 11 and 12, everything was declining. This is where there's a large loss of revenue to public schools. And why, in prior conversations with you, I had to talk about reducing staff, or reducing the number of staff. I'm happy to say we had no RIFs, we had no layoffs, or any of those kinds of horrible things that could occur. And I'm pleased and proud that we were able to do that. Then you start to see the incline, both in state equalization guarantee and in unit value. And you notice they're starting to get a little closer together, which means they're getting closer to dialing in the state budget. Now, I'm not going to go deeply into that, but what I want you to see is the increases that are happening in state equalization guarantee and in unit value here in Las Cruces public schools. You're going to see, if you look at the bottom right-hand side, that we're going to go up to about $177 million in our state equalization guarantee. Okay, this one's hard to read, so let's talk a little bit about what's here. Our revenue picture is one that is very hard fought. As we put this budget together, we had to look at our use of cash, which is non-recurring revenue. It's kind of like going to your savings account and paying for your groceries. You can do that for a while, but after a while you run out of your savings account, and then how do you buy groceries? Well, that's the same issue in public schools we have to worry about. And in Las Cruces public schools, one of the things I noticed 7 years when I came here was that we were just about tapped out on our savings account. And so over the years, we've worked very hard at cash balance. How do you move cash balance forward without inhibiting our efforts at increasing salaries and increasing educational quality? And that's the balancing act every year in the budget. How many people do you hire to make sure you have the program coverage you need, and how much do you pay them? And you balance that. And what fund do you pay for them out of? Do you pay for it out of your recurring money, like your paycheck, or do you pay for it out of your savings account or our cash balance? And for the budget in the current year to work, we used about $8 million of cash balance. And to make this future budget work, we are getting very, very close to spending about another $8 million. So when you go to the next year, a year out, the 2015-16 budget, we get rather precarious if we're not really careful going through this next year. So while we look at some wonderful things that are going to happen, I urge all of us to contemplate how we're using our checkbooks, how we're using our savings, and how we're using our normal checking account to pay for what we do. And it's all okay. It's all good practice. But this budget is about as tight as we could make it be to do all of the things we're trying to do. And you'll see what we're doing, which I'm pleased with. One of the things that is rather problematic is the 4.7% reduction you see in the yellow box in instructional materials. Okay? That's so our 4.7% reduction in instructional materials. So we have an adoption for science coming, which is a very expensive adoption, and we have less money to do it with than we did last year. And I will tell you, I'm rather concerned because the state of New Mexico doesn't appear to be paying as much attention to those resources, the instructional materials resources in our classrooms as they might. In fact, we ran some numbers on it, and for the Las Cruces Public Schools, our instructional materials funding from the state appears to be about 48% of what we need for the textbooks in the classroom. And so that's problematic, and that's where the electronic materials are part of that answer, perhaps, but that's also the question of how we're going to bridge that gap over time. And we'll be working with you that are our staff as we go through this next year to try to work our way through making sure kids have books or access to materials, but staying inside of our instructional materials budget, which is going to be rather problematic in this next cycle. So we do want to work with you on that. Transportation is another area that isn't totally vetted out yet. There's something called equipment costs and equipment rental costs, and we haven't gotten that completely codified by the state of New Mexico. So in the numbers we're using right now, we don't have the equipment replacement costs dialed in yet. So it's going to suppress, or in other words, make lower what the actual numbers will ultimately be in budget. Now, whether that happens before July the 1st or not, I'm not sure. The state's rather slow in getting that calculation to us. It's important to our bus contractor. Remember, we don't own the buses, a contractor does. The state flows money through us to them. And at the end of the day, the cost for us to do that business is higher than the state funds. And it's higher to the tune of about $900,000 a year. So we're almost $1 million upside down in that particular case. Now, the board finds that important. They believe it's important to get children from their home to school and do it in a fashion that allows them to not walk longer distances to do that. But I'll be very candid, as we go through this next year, we're going to have to look at our routing schemes to see if we can still afford to do that. And so I'm simply wanting to make note of that at this point. Did I miss one? Okay, so let's look at the non-payroll issues, and I'm really proud of this. Really proud of this. We talked about supplies and materials for the classroom. We talked about teachers having what they need to do business with in the classroom. School budgets have increased 18% in this budget from this year to next, to the proposed budget, for non-payroll purchases. That's good news for all of us. That means we're making sure of the supplies, materials, and whatnot. The largest increases are listed. One of them is the software called Lexia. Lexia is primarily an elementary school software for reading. It's really quite elegant. It's where we're using it. It has tremendous payback, and students are learning faster and better because of that. We want to bring this on in as a system-wide platform. As we begin to ramp that up, as you can imagine, the cost to do business will be more. But what's more important than the cost to do business is the return on what you spend for the business you do. And what you see in educational gains with children in Lexia is quite remarkable. Also, supplies and materials, as I said, is another area that we are looking at enhancing. We recognize that as you go into a teacher's classroom, some of their very best tools are the ones they put together themselves. And their supplies and materials to do that are very important to us, and we want to be sure we support that. And in this budget, we do. You'll see in our operating cost budget, instruction in the non-payroll is up 19%. Support for students is up 41%. And interestingly enough, we have reduced the amount of operating to the plant side of the world, the maintenance and whatnot side. We've actually reduced it by 11%. And so that's a careful balance that we have. And Bobby and others in our PPD group, thank you for your assistance on that budget. Now, our departmental budgets are also here. And we'd like to note that we are focusing in certain departments. When we were in deficit, when the state wasn't providing money, we asked our departmental folks to be the hardest hit, to pare them back the most. And I'll be real honest with you, they've gone back to their skeleton. It's time to build a little bit of meat on the bone, and you're going to see that in these budgets. Now, the percentages look pretty high. I see a 454% increase right there. But that's an increase in turnaround. Remember, we're adding schools to it. And in large budget schemes, it's not a lot of money. It just turns a higher percentage. You understand that less money, as you add a little bit to it, makes it look like a large increase. If you look at athletics, I had it there. It's there someplace. There it is. A 22% increase. Oh, here's something that's happened in athletics as an example. Did you know that we now belong to several different districts? Okay, so you have Centennial High School, that isn't what's going to be the new 5A, and there are costs there because of the way the world has been redistricted, which causes more travel for the teams from Centennial. We have to pay for those costs, and that's primarily what's driving this. So we're not increasing a lot of money into athletics. It is caused by travel. Our supply budget for athletics is remaining about constant. And so it's mostly for our student travel piece of it that you see that 22% increase. And we can expect that to recur until 2 years from now, when they will join the 6A districts with the rest of our high schools. And when we get to that point in alignment, not this next year or the following year, but the following year, the 2016-17 year, they'll all be in the same district. That'll actually drop because we'll be competing against ourselves and those closer to us regionally than is happening in the new 5A. And they've redistricted. What used to be 4A is now 5A, and what used to be 5A is now 6A for this upcoming year. So that's the terminology I'm using for that. Department budgets have increased 9% over 2013-14 in the main. And we think, again, that's good news. Most of that's a build back for budget deficits that they've had over the years, so we can support our instructional process better. Most increases are in the area of instruction. If you go through the chart, you'll see that the majority of things we do focus directly in on our instructional component. As Terry Dean says every time I talk with him, our mission is teaching kids. And so everything we do, the first lens that we put in place is, are we or are we not supporting that central mission? And if the answer is no, then we tend to push back from it. If the answer is yes, we tend to pull it toward us and try to go to those decisions. Reserves and utility accounts have been eliminated, and I really want to spend a minute on that. I talked to you a minute ago about cash balance. Cash balance is the savings account that you hold contingently to be sure that when you have to pay a bill, you have the money to pay it with. Let me give you an example. On July the 1st, we write a really big check for about $4.5 million for liability insurance. So what do you think I have to have in the bank on July the 1st? Something more than $4.5 million. That $4.5 million on June the 30th, which is the end of the last fiscal year, has to be at least $4.5 million to write that check. But there's also a summer payroll that's a little over $2 million that has to be paid also. And so as we begin to manage cash balance, most of it is all about timing and when do you have the cash available to pay for what you're having to do. And that's how we use our savings account to prop our checking account. It's kind of like paying your utility bill. You get paid on the 1st and the 15th. Your utility bill comes in is due on the 10th. You may use your savings account to pay that bill on the 10th, and then you replenish your savings account on the 15th, so you have it again for the next month. Is that right? That's the same kind of thing that happens in much grander scale in districts. And that's part of why we manage our cash balance so carefully. One of the ways we have collected that cash over time to make sure you have the wherewithal in budget is to look at our utilities. Did you know the weather's different year to year? Let me just ask you that question. Do you know that? Did you know it was going to be this windy last year at this time, this week or yesterday? I didn't. It's different, isn't it? Well, guess what? Temperatures, both heat and cold, differ year to year. Our scheme in utilities has been to look at our larger use years in our utilities. If we're going to have to run air conditioning starting in March and all summer and shut it down in October, that has a different cost than when you have to start running air conditioners in May and quit running them in August. You better have enough money to run the March to October scenario, so that's what we've done. In this budget, we're not doing that. We shrunk that time period, and rather than going on extremes, we are going on average uses. Now, the good news is that'll let us spend the money, quote, unquote, somewhere else, budget the money somewhere else, rather than in utilities. The bad news is that if the extremes happen, we don't have enough budget to do it, or in other words, enough money allocated in that part of the budget. And so we're going to be very watchful with that, and I think that's why Terry Dean continues to lose a little hair up on his head, and so do I, because we're trying to make sure that we take the money at our priorities that we just talked about, but we still have the management stuff you have to worry about as far as utility costs and those front-end costs and whatnot that you have. So reserve accounts in the utilities have been eliminated, and so as we go into future years, we're going to have to talk about them. Now let's talk about the stuff that matters. Did you know that a majority of our budget is in people? In fact, 92.3% of our budget, operating budget, is people and the associated costs with them. And I'll be real candid with everybody. The board has heard me say this, but I'll say it to all of you. In a perfect world where we could budget without the issues we have at the state level, we would want that 92.3% to look more like 87 or 88%. So some would say you're over-leveraging personnel. We think we have to do that to get our class sizes where they need to be and to do the kinds of programmatic things we want to do. But we're on the high end. And so these become recurring costs because when you give somebody a job, they expect to still have one next year. And so that creates long-term some budget effects. Here's what we're doing. Our instructional staff, we're adding 37 new teachers in this budget. We're expecting no more students than we had in the current year. So we're going to have 37 teachers with no new students. Did I say earlier that we're looking at class size as one of the issues? And I said earlier we're also looking at some programmatic impact issues and putting people where we think that matters. That 37 is part of why you see the 92.3% in salaries and benefits on recurring revenue. And we think that's a good plan overall at this point, but I want to be very honest with people about what we're doing here. So let's see how that divides out. We have 13 elementary positions planned. I said earlier that the most of those are aimed at where? Earlier grades, kindergarten, first grade is where you'd expect to see most of that. Not completely. We have bilingual education programs where in some schools we have some class size issues where, kids don't come in nice little packages. So we may need to look at staffing in some of those, and we are. But that is an important item we're going to. Middle schools is the largest, 17 new teachers in the middle schools. If I was to say to you that the most challenging part of our mission for student performance, if I was to codify where that is, I would say it's at middle school. If we're not winning the fight like we need to, that's where it's at. And as we met with our middle school principals, we believe that part of what we need to do is add 17 staff members to allow us to change how we do business a little bit and to look at not only our class sizes, but how we structure our classes so we can pay more attention to student learning. And that's going to be a good investment for this district. And we think it'll have good benefit as far as what our student performance will be over time. Then I'll call what's in the bullpen 7 positions. In the bullpen is our term for meaning they're unassigned positions. Again, if you go from this year to next year, the same students that are here this year will not be here next year. Did you know that? They won't. They move around. We see a little bit lower graduating class this year because we had what you call a trough go through in our enrollment. In other words, you had a group of kids that had less enrollment at that age, and they moved through the system, and they became seniors this year, and they're graduating. Our graduation rate's where it was, but the number graduating is down. Does that make sense? Well, the same thing happens, and you have to be able to be malleable with that as we staff in our schools, to be sure that we have the right class sizes, and every principal has what they need as far as staff. We're adding 1 dean of students to the mix. That's Arrowhead Park Medical Academy. We're not adding a principal. We have Jennifer is the principal for Arrowhead Park. She will principal both buildings. We have a dean of students, or a number 2 position for each of the buildings. We've yet to select this one, but that'll allow us to have eyes on as we're in each of the buildings. And these are separate buildings that are going on in separate missions. So we feel really good about that. We also have some other changes. We're adding 3 assistant principals. Our 3 largest elementary schools, quite candidly, under our new evaluation system, we're struggling. Yeah, did you know this? The new evaluation system takes right at 20 hours of evaluation per teacher per year. Now think about if you have a staff in an elementary school that is 45. How do you meter that into what happens on a daily basis and do it well? And so we're adding 3 assistant principals to our 3 largest elementary schools. We're adding a custodian, and that's for Arrowhead Park Medical Academy. We're adding 1 security, Arrowhead Park Medical Academy, new facility. 2 additional maintenance positions, and we've been working on our grounds and our supportive buildings, and we see that we have more and more need, and so we're going to reach out and increase our staffing in our maintenance area so that we can do our diligence at keeping buildings up to the level they need to be and our grounds up to the level they need to be. We also opened a new baseball field. We have a artificial turf football field, which the good news is that reduced the amount of need to support that. And so as you mix all of that together, including our building maintenance, we're doing 2 additional maintenance positions. Our technology support. Technology support is an interesting conundrum. We really need to have technology in the classrooms. We need to support the technology that's there. We have several schemes that are going on throughout the system and how we support that. In some schools, we have a technologist, I guess is the term I use, in the building to support that. But we also are much like many of your support Microsofts or your Apples or others. We actually have a call center, so to speak, a trouble desk you can call into. But as we looked this year at how we're staffing to make sure that if you're a teacher and you're having problems in your classroom with your technology, that we're able to be more nimble at getting there and helping you with that. And so that indeed is what we're doing with our technology positions. 3 of them we're going to add, and we continue each year to look at what that can produce. And then we're adding 3 secretary clerical positions also, again, supporting the mission of what we do at the building level primarily. We need to let one of those is early college high school. And so that's the level of support that we are giving. Again, I just want to point back out that our salaries and benefits are 92.3%. That's 4 or 5% higher than the norm might be, but it's our commitment to making sure that we're well staffed for our classrooms. Now, there's some pending issues that are in place at this time that I would simply are not completed in our budget. Okay, the first one is operational overtime. Now, we continue to work at right staffing so the people who come to work 40 hours are done at 40 hours. We can't have that succinctly exactly like it needs to be. We continue to dial that in. We haven't completed that process in budget yet. Summer projects, we're trying to be sure we have good definition around those. Right now we've been doing a needs assessment at the buildings to look at those summer projects. Summer projects are all kinds of things. They could be things as simple as getting a new coat of paint or 2 inside of some classrooms. It could be cleaning up the exterior. We use, in many cases, casual employment with university students, high school students, and others that we bring on a part-time basis during the summer to help us with this particular aspect. Okay, sub-pay increase. One of the things that we've been doing is studying our substitute pay. We're in an interesting counterbalance. On one side, we see a slightly increasing level of use of sick leave, as an example, by employees, by teachers, because that's who the substitutes go to. And on the other side, we see a request to increase the pay. Simple math might be that we reduce the use of days so we can increase the pay for those serving those days. And we continue to work with our union folks, our partners in that, to try to work at balancing when people are sick, them being gone, and when people perhaps can control some of the absences. We do it in professional development too, by the way, because when you bring people for professional development during the year, we need to be sure that their time has substitutes in place when we take them out of the classroom. So part of that is our practice. Principal training, we've been working at our principal training. We have a fair amount of turnover in principals, a fairly young principal squad that's in place. But more critically, did you know the state's throwing more stuff at us? I mean, New Mexico Teach, the evaluation component, I think principals have put in something like 40 hours this year of training and learning how to do what's required by the state. And so we're putting finishing touches on what that looks like. And then we currently are negotiating our increments. We believe that our increment schedule, which has been changed for over 25 years, probably needs to be changed. And so we've been working with our unions on that particular issue. And as I said earlier, federal funds are sort of trickling in. Let's look at technology real quickly. In the current year, we invested $4.8 million new dollars in technology. That's part of why we have the 3 techs, because we have an increased number of units. But there's also, and you can see the listing there, there's also the issue of making sure that we're ready for park. That testing is all computerized. We've been spending 2 years getting ready for it. And indeed, in this next 2014-15, we'll need to continue spending money to be sure what's behind the wall works and making sure what we are using works for the park readiness. Memory upgrades. We have a lot of computers that, because of the park testing and other pressures, simply aren't where they need to be. And we have developed an equipment replacement schedule for technology that we think we can sustain over time. But one of the things we have to do is take some current older computers and upgrade them so they can be used in the interim. Expanded replacement of student computers, the labs and classrooms. It's all about age. And it's all about capabilities. and making sure that we have a good threshold wherever a child touches our technology. We're trying very hard to do that. And finally, our technology inventory is in process as we continue to look at both the deployment and the practice of using technology in the classroom. A computer that isn't used every day is a real expensive paperweight. And we don't want to have that as our practice. And in some cases, we have that happening. So those should be redeployed where they'll be used. It's why, as an example, this year we bought 50 new Promethean boards, but we invited staff to come and apply for them because we've learned that when somebody applies for it and trains on it, they use it. And sometimes when we just give it to you in a classroom, you're hesitant to use it. And so we're using a new technique to do that. And that inventory is very important. We're looking not only at what do you have, but how often do you use what you have. Enhanced educational environments. What does that mean? So when you go in a classroom, it should wear well, is the term I'll use for a student, shouldn't it? Same thing when they go into a library or when they go to a cafeteria. And one of the things we have struggled with in this district is good furnishing and equipment cycling. We can continue to work on that, and we're using that enhanced education environments. In the current year, we invested $5.7 million in these environmental issues. You can see where they're at cafeterias, at elementary and mid, and on down. Information commons. Love you to come into those buildings and see what that really means. And then our 2014-15 projects continue along those lines, and our next round of replacement is dependent upon available funding. Now, let me turn to questions you might have. I think we've got about 12 or 13 minutes left in our presentation time.
Thank you, Mr. Rounds. And just as a reminder for those that came in a little later, if you raise your hand, we have a microphone that we'll bring to you so that we can capture your questions. Let me begin first with some emails that you received prior to tonight. The first one's a little bit long, so bear with me here. It says, my question about the budget concerns technology support. I'm the building technology contact for Sierra Middle School. I'm also the librarian. I would like to see the district allocate more towards technology support. We have 3 computer labs, 1 Project Lead the Way lab, 6 laptop carts, 4 iPad carts, 15 desktops at the library, 19 network printers, and almost every classroom has a set of at least 10 laptops. Every teacher has a desktop and a laptop computer that they use daily for attendance, lesson planning, PLC time, and entering grades. The stipend I receive for servicing what I can and entering work orders for things I can't is $300 per semester. I spend at least 10% of my day working on tech issues daily instead of library business. Even more than that as we set up for and administer computer-based tests. I understand that I don't need to address as many issues as I do, that entering a work order covers my responsibility. But teachers rely on this equipment to work when they have planned to use it. The district provides shared technicians between middle schools, and they do a great job, but they aren't on a regular schedule, and I never know when they'll be at Sierra. So if a teacher has an issue, I either have to stop my work in the library to help them, or apologize and tell them to resort to Plan B or resort to Plan B until a tech arrives. This seems like a waste of technology money we have already spent when the equipment isn't being serviced and running. Students and teachers have come to expect that technology will be a part of their workday at Sierra every day. Is there a way in next year's budget to provide more time and more regular tech support for our middle schools?
Okay, boy, there's a lot of pieces to that. Let me try a few of them. So first of all, yes, we're adding 3 positions for tech support. We have to rely probably on the short term on how we can share technology expertise among our technologists. Now, the key question that we're trying to figure out is to what level should they be embedded at the school, and at what level should they be shared between schools? And we're still working with it. The additional 3 positions, part of what's there is the management of that. See, assigning people to go to Sierra Middle School when there is a device that isn't working seems simple enough until you're the one doing it. And you have 30 requests at the same moment throughout the district. Now, what we've learned is if we have a technologist at Sierra proper, It probably isn't quite large enough as a facility to utilize one full technician every day. And that's the balancing act we're trying to do. So one of the things we've done to help hedge that bet is make available technologists by telephone, or that it can actually go online and take control of your computer and fix it from a remote site. And so as we add these 3 positions, those are some of the techniques we expect to employ. Over time, the likelihood is we're going to have to hire more technicians. As technology becomes more and more integrated in what goes on, we're going to have to do that. But here's the rest of the story. Every teacher is likely to have to become a mini technologist to an extent. It's just like at your home computer. The more you know about how you use Facebook, the more you're going to be able to use Facebook. Or, simply put, the more you're going to use your computing program for your banking account is directly relevant to how much you have learned how to use it. So our skill sets need to come up, but our support also needs to come up, and it's how do you balance that? So we have professional development that we offer for teachers. In fact, we've trained a lot of folks on Promethean boards, Promethean technology. All 50 of these teachers I talked about getting their 50 boards were required to go through 3 training sessions, half day each, in Promethean utilization, so they can debug a lot of things themselves for their board and not wait for a technician to come over to make sure. Now, at the same time, we hired 2 Promethean technicians that are certified to tear the board apart, fix it electronically, and put it back together. Now, that's good use of their time where they're doing the high-tech side, but I promise you, the teacher next door who will work together with you because you both had Promethean training is a rest of the story. And so it's a balancing act between those. We continue to assess how much we spend for technology support, and we need to continue working on that.
Okay, is there any questions in the audience? Just raise your hands. We'll move on to the next one. I'm a teacher at one of the high schools. I understand the 3% raise the legislature approved for us is an average of 3%. How is it decided as to who will get less than 3 and who gets more than 3%? Is it based on years of service?
So I'll be very honest. We have the threshold as a 3% average. Today, there was a good amount of time spent with a team from NEA Las Cruces and a team from Las Cruces Public Schools trying to answer part of that question exactly. And that's what negotiations are about, is looking at how you're going to spread that. And there are a number of issues, lots of issues to look at, including structures of current salary schedules. By the way, the same will be true for our educational assistants, and they're 6% also. And so those are things we're working on, and that's part of the negotiated process we have.
Thank you. The next question is, I'm hearing a lot about the JUMP program, and that is, it is intended to help struggling kids with reading. Does this program cost more than having a quote-unquote normal classroom? Is the pupil-teacher ratio the same?
So let's run that up. So a JUMP classroom has between 20 and 22 kids. And it's a kinder, first, and second grade combination. Now, kinder classroom's 14. Remember we talked about that? A first grade class is 22, I believe, Dr. Sanchez. And a second grade classroom is 24 is the maximum size. When you blend those together, 20 to 22 is right in the average range of what a kinder, first, and second grade combination size would be. So to that extent, it is not more costly from a personnel standpoint. What may be slightly more costly is the initial setup. And we're trying some things. We're beta testing some things as far as use of technology we just talked about. So we have center-based approach and some discovery education process that's happening that we were trained from Northern Arizona University to do. We would hope to roll that out district-wide. And so there is some cost when you put a Promethean board in a room, but hey, wait, we are doing that in other classrooms too. When you put iPads in the room, we just heard from this Sierra librarian that they have a whole lot of iPads. I think that's what I just heard. You may put a couple of computers in the room, and I think I just heard from Sierra that they had a whole cart full of those that they have. And so I would say that there may be some initial costs that might be slightly higher as you set up classrooms, but the long-term operating cost appears to be standard across what our normal condition is, and that's part of the good news. Let me just put a plug in for that. So let me ask you a cost question. If you could spend the same dollar and have 71% of your students either reading at or above proficiency, we'd feel pretty good about it, wouldn't we? But if you spent the same dollar and got 81% of them when none of them were proficient at the beginning, which one would be the better investment in your mind? The 81% is the jump number. 71% is the average district-wide number based on Test C administration of discovery this year. Now that's a good story. And so the cost effect being basically neutral, the educational effect appears to be higher in the norm. And those are the kinds of things we want to study as a district in every program we have, because we want to be as effective as we can for our students.
We can get in a couple more. Mr. Rounds, we continue to have issues with having enough textbooks for every student in every classroom. We are using classroom sets, which is fine, but we want to use more digital books for classwork. Is this something that you support?
I think you heard earlier the answer is yes. Now, from a cost effect, 85 cents on the dollar is a good thing, as long as you have the platforms to do it. That's the iPads or the Chromebooks or the whatever technology we're using to do that with. You have to have both. And so the cost effect is slightly more for ebooks in the short term and slightly less in the long term. The real issue isn't that. The real issue is the level of commitment the state of New Mexico is making for instructional materials. Remember that I said they're funding at about 48 cents on the dollar that we need in Las Cruces Public Schools. That means that they underfunded us by about $1.5 million in this budget cycle. That's not okay. That's something we need to push. And I think that may be more the issue than the question of ebooks versus non-ebooks. I would venture to say that if we go out 5 years, you'll see that more than half of our textbooks in 5 years will be electronic. I think that's where we're heading.
Any questions in here? Janice, there's one over there.
You know, I have a question about security. You say you're going to hire one security person for the new medical campus. Now, my daughter's an elementary school student, and I've never seen a security person in that building. I'm wondering, how many schools do we have without any security people? And how do we decide then where security people are going to be stationed?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. And security is a continuing interest we all have. So we do assessments building by building. Rule of thumb is that all middle and all high schools have security specific to them. Most of our security at the elementary schools is staff reliant. So that's the principal, the assistant principal, and some selected staff members. We also have an agreement with the city of Las Cruces when we have certain events occur where they will quick respond to us and also provide us enhanced security if we know of a threat that may be there. We also can reach into the middles and high schools to the SROs and to our security personnel and have them at a building if there appears that there might be an imminent threat of some kind or even a rumored threat that occurs. And so at this point, none of the elementaries have a specific security person. But as you get to the sizes of middle and high schools and the ages and the kinds of events that occur, that's where we are investing now today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rounds, we're out of time. You have homework tonight. You have to answer 3 more emails you didn't even get to.
Okay,
We'll
I'll
give
do
you
that.
those later. We want to end with one note, though, and it's not a question, but it does say, I know Mr. Rounds gets a lot of fire for just about everything he and others decide. So at this time, I would like to say that I have utmost confidence in his budgetary skills. A few years ago, when our district was in an $11 million shortfall, he foresaw that coming and was ready. I, as a teacher, do not feel the impact. Thank you for holding the courage to hold the office you do. Carmen Merlano, East Picacho 4th grade teacher, and that will let you wrap up tonight with final comment, sir.
And Carmen, I want to thank you, number one, for that very kind comment. I hope I'm deserving of it. As we move through time, our budget is something we want to continue to pay attention to. I appreciate every one of you in the room and watching. The most important investment, in my view, we can make in the community is in our children. And I urge the legislature to continue looking at that and enhancing their funding for that purpose. We make a difference in this district. I recognize the educators that everybody who works for us is an educator. There were 3,800 employees. No matter what you do, you touch kids every day. And because you do your business, you're sort of sometimes the unsung heroes of developing our future. I hope this budget supports that well. I believe it does. I want to thank Mr. Dean and others who work so diligently, Dr. Sanchez with his leadership and instruction, and others as we move through time. So thank you very much for being here this evening, and Godspeed.